you become a little bit less tolerant of the things that aren't enriching you.
Totally.
Finally, it's like you just don't have the time or the energy to put up with shit that you used to put up with.
Yeah.
Or activities you used to engage with, like oftentimes are little addictions. That's a very interesting thing when you start to commit to yourself and commit to doing the things that actually enrich you, is that all of these little bad habits, all of these little distractions that, you used to be slave to, suddenly just kind of falling off of you.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Welcome one and welcome all once again. This is Evan, and on the other end of this is Brandon. We're doing a podcast thing.
Hello,
We're doing
everyone.
a podcast thing once again. And if you click because you saw the title, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just selected something randomly, but most likely you saw the title and you clicked on it. Hope you're excited about it, because we're excited about it. Create your atmosphere to flourish.
Ooh, it's a big one.
Ooh.
This is an important one, actually. This was a big discovery for me, as far as just a lot of personal work for me personally went into this particular conversation, not consciously, but to get to this point where we could talk about it, to have had these awarenesses and these insights about this stuff. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of, just battling, myself and the world around me, and, metaphorically, people and situations and circumstances. So I'm really excited to share this, and I think it's going to be a really cool conversation with lots of fun discoveries.
Yeah. So, as always, Brent and I usually have a little bit of a pre-chat before we get into the chat, just to get into something that's relevant and for us personally, but something that also excites us. So there's so much that we can get into with this that I don't necessarily know where to begin. Do you have a jumping off point? Yeah,
I do. I want to start with the idea that I just want to share this metaphor that so we've talked about this before, and we've mentioned it in other podcasts, but it's the idea that, inside the acorn is the oak tree, so inside the very seed of this thing is the vision of the oak tree. And so as you are, as an artist, as a person, as a human being on the other end of this vision, this thing that you have inside of yourself, you might not be totally clear on what that is yet, but this calling, this thing that's inside of you, it's in your nature to become that. You're designed to become that. And so all you really need is the circumstances, the atmosphere, essentially, I want to say atmosphere around you to be able to do that. But that atmosphere that's around you actually first has to kind of start inside of you, and you work with the atmosphere outside of you. So think of it like a garden. You plant seeds in it. The soil, if it is good soil in a good place and it's properly being watered and nurtured with sun and things it needs, whatever those seeds are will grow. And when you see a garden grow, when you actually see it start to grow, it can be very sudden. And you're like, wow, a week ago, this was nothing. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's this wonder of green and all this stuff growing out of it. Your nature is like that. And this is the thing that I've come to this realization for myself, is that inside of me and inside of every person, we already have that inside of us. And the circumstances, the world around us, the atmosphere, if it is the right thing for us, we will naturally grow into what we're supposed to grow into. It's our responsibility, though, to make sure that that atmosphere around us, including the garden, the soil, the the temperature, in a sense, is all the right things for us to grow. And we're all different types of plants. We're all different types of things that are supposed to grow. And not all of us are going to flourish in the same environment or the same atmosphere. And we need to figure out what that is. That's part of our job. And we can always, here's the key thing, we can always replant ourselves. It's not like you were born into something and you're like, well, I was planted here and this is where I'm stuck. No, you can uproot yourself and totally start again at any time, over and over again. And that's kind of the main metaphor that I want to kind of build this conversation upon.
Yeah. And we are the garden, but we are also the one that tends the garden too, which is maybe kind of what's unique about us from maybe just like a plant that's stuck in the ground. And I think what I really like about coming into this conversation is that in many ways, this is part of it, is the understanding that it's like we have a sort of a commitment and a charge that has been placed upon us to create that atmosphere. That's part of creating the atmosphere, is learning that we have to be the ones to be creating it for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Another way that I've always liked to put this is, and a question that I always like to ask is, like, what are you doing to enrich yourself? And actually, let me take that a few steps back. It's like, first ask, it's like, what are the things that enrich you? Because sometimes we can ask the question, it's just like, do things that are enriching. And so it's like, oh, I gotta read more. I gotta, that could be part of it. But it's like, sometimes that's us just taking on, ideas and notions of what enriching is, as opposed to taking that pause, that moment, or whatever time you need to actually go into what are the things that enrich me. That, and again, I'll go to that. This is not, while the intellect can certainly play a part in how we discover these things, it's really comes from a sensing, feeling place that we discover those things that enrich us. Yeah. It's maybe it is reading, but maybe it's reading a specific kind of thing, a specific kind of material. For myself, I have to be reading some sort of book on traditional wisdom, spirituality, or, I need to be reading philosophy, these different types of things. That's a part of my diet. It's a part of my stable, because if I'm not doing that, I feel depleted. I don't have the energy I need. I don't have the perspective that I want to have in my day-to-day life. Same thing like with hiking in nature or just walking in nature. It's an essential component to enriching myself, which is building my atmosphere. That's creating something around me. It's creating an inertia and an environment that allows my own nature to come out, that allows my own nature to flourish as best as it possibly can.
Those are good examples. I think that if you're on the other end of this listening, you could be in a very different stage, right? Like we can all be in different stages, but if you want to start change in your life, you got to start with small things that you have control over. You don't get to decide like, I want this person to be this way, or I want to be in a different job right now. It's like, that might take some time, and you might not have total control over that yet, or ever, but there's an evolution to growth, right? One of the things that I always say to people, I'm just like, make your bed. Like, make your bed. That's something you can control. Like, clean your house, dust, sweep. Like these things sound so simple and so like silly and pointless, but if you think about, like, imagine your bed was your mind, right? Like, and it wasn't made. Like, how are you supposed to do anything? You know what I mean? Like, if you have clutter in your place, and I'm guilty of that. I get caught up in this all the time. But anything that's in your way is a representation of something in your mind that's in your way. So a lot of the time people will say like, by doing the dishes, they'll feel better. Like they don't want to do it, but then once they do it, they'll feel a lot better. And by the way, if you're feeling depressed at all, like if someone is listening to this and you just happen to be feeling down, this is a great first initial step to start getting yourself out of that. Just start taking care of things you can control, because most people that feel depressed, and by the way, I think this is more expansive than people who have just recognized they're depressed, but like you need to feel some control over your world. That's part of the reason why people feel so down and powerless, because they feel like they have no control over your world. And there's certain things that you definitely have control over. Making your bed, doing the dishes, sweeping up, cleaning up, organizing. All these are chores that people don't want to do, but I'm telling you, like, they will change your life. And that's where a lot of this has to start. You know, your garden needs to be clean. Your garden needs to have good soil and good things around it for this seed to grow. And if those things aren't taken care of, you can get all the other like great things that you want out here and almost nothing will happen, because that initial soil that's right around you is not nurturing you and it's poisoning you. So
there's something that is very profound about something as simple and honest about, like cleaning your room, making your bed, doing the dishes. It's very interesting that in almost any culture around the world, if you look at people who put themselves into a monastic life, that kind of shit is essential. You know, and in the Zen tradition, the higher up you are, the worse shit you have to do. You know, it's not like the newbies who have to go and clean the toilets. It's like the most sort of like woke of everybody that has to do that stuff. But there's something incredibly important. You've got to tend the garden. You've got to take care of the grounds. There's an honest simplicity that lends itself very, very well to actually uncovering our own nature. You know, and I think that there's probably a lot of reasons we could probably go into as to why that is. I don't know if that's where that. I don't want to take that conversation down that path because that's just too specific a thing to get into. But you know, the general message that we can even adopt some of these mentalities for ourselves, you know, some of these monastic mentalities, and be like, okay, you know, like I clean the room, I do the dishes, I, you know, like whatever it is, you fold the blankets, you do these things, and there's a tremendous power to cleaning and decluttering that suddenly makes things possible for some bizarre reason, you know?
Well, it's also space, right? It's space to grow. If you've ever seen a tomato plant, like a tomato tree, they're quite incredible because when they start growing, they don't look like much. They look pretty small. And then all of a sudden, a certain point in the season will hit and they just blow up. Like they get so big so quickly. And right now in a garden that I'm tending, there's a tomato plant. And like 1 week you're like, oh, this thing's like it's growing. And then the next week it's like, wow, this thing's starting to get big. And then all of a sudden the next week, I couldn't even believe it was the same plant. It was so big that it was like outgrowing the whole planter. And it's just because it's getting the right amount of water, the right amount of sun, all the right elements in it. And like this week I looked at it, we had to trim it down, right? So you trimmed it down and the tomatoes are starting to grow, and they're growing so quickly. You're like, holy crap, like this thing is just
what am I going to do with all these tomatoes?
Right. So, and the other thing too is it has a this might sound like it's off topic, but this is very important for the artist to hear. There's like a actual a barrier kind of around the plant, right? Like a metal wiring and a backing so that the plant can have a base to grow. So because it has this sturdy thing set up for it, it's been capable of growing way bigger than it could otherwise because it has like support. So one of the things that you can do as an artist is when you set up a good support system for yourself to grow into, you'll all of a sudden realize you can grow way bigger, way quicker. And so like, I think one of the most important things that I've learned partly through gardening alone is just that things can only grow as well as they've been provided the opportunity to grow. So like this plant, for example, one of many, needs enough soil to be able to spread its roots, to be able to grow, to be able to suck up the water, to be able to expand. But it also needed the upper support for it to be able to grow big and grow strong. And had we not done that, had we not added this element to the tomato plant, it would not have been able to grow quite like this. So, you might be thinking all about how you want to go and I want to be that big and that's what I want to do. But it first started from a few little seeds. It started with nothing. You couldn't even see anything. And then it's the little leaves start sprinkling through, some little green. And then all of a sudden, like a few weeks later, you're like, what are we dealing with? We got a tree here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that, I think it's really important to look at yourself like that. So like you're this little tiny seed underground and you got no traction. Nobody can see anything in your world. And you're like, I'm not getting anywhere. Just suddenly you sprout from the surface and you're like, hey, I'm doing this. And then all of a sudden, you could be like so monumentally bigger than you even realize, much more quickly than you realize. And I'm not saying it needs to happen that way, but it can. And if you want to grow, a lot of your responsibility, because you're the gardener as much as you're the seed, right? So you need to set up yourself as the seed to grow. Like you need to take care of what needs to be taken care of. And like, if you're not making your bed or you're not taking care of a little business when things get really busy, you're never going to take care of it and you're going to get overwhelmed and that might destroy you.
I love how a lot of this stuff kind of came around, like, because you started to put together some stuff that I was putting together in my head as you were talking, because I loved how you put it, where it's just like, you sometimes you can't see it you don't even see it growing yet, like, or from the outside, you can't see anything. Right. But that's why it's so important that for you see something happening, because like before someone else sees something happening, there's a capacity to which you need to begin seeing something happening before anyone else will. You need to be paying attention to the changes, the shifts, the growth that are going on, the conditions that are being created, where suddenly you're going to be able to burst out and people are going to see it. And bizarrely, again, sometimes just doing these simple things that, again, you are in control of, like things that don't depend on anyone else for it to be done, right? Like you don't depend on anyone else to make your bed. You don't depend on anyone else to fold and hang up your clothes. You don't depend on anybody else to do your dishes. And
by the way, if you do, like maybe your parent does it, maybe someone's younger, start doing it. Like your parents will be like, oh my God, they're doing it. But don't do it because you're trying to impress your parents or you're trying to do something. Do it because you take pride in being the kind of person that takes control of your life. Like, not because you're going to be like a good kid, but because you realize the power that comes from you taking care of business. Yeah. I mean, it's anyway, I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, no, it's a means of putting care and attention into you and into your life. We don't often look at it that way. Like this is maybe a bit of a side note to this, but like every now and then when I'm in the middle of doing some mundane activity, like doing dishes, I will, and if I find any kind of agitation that I have about doing the work that I'm doing, I'll ask myself, well, what's wrong with the thing that I'm doing right now? And it's like, what makes this thing wrong? And very quickly you realize that you're the only one who's making this thing wrong in this moment, and that this is as good as an activity as anything to be doing, right? But like I want to just bring this back into the space of sometimes what's so profound about being able to do just doing something like the dishes and cleaning your house and doing whatever needs to be done is that's one of those things in which you see a change. That's one of those ways in which you see that you affect your environment in a real tangible way. And from there you can begin to expand further and further out to see how you affect like a greater environment in more subtle ways. but still but even more powerful ways that you actually can change things. But sometimes just that small step to be like, oh yes, I did this. I'm having an effect in my world. That's something that if you're disconnected from that, if you're disconnected from, your life and your actions as having any kind of meaning or impact, it's a beautiful way of just being like, okay, maybe no one else sees this, but I see this. I'm having an impact. I'm doing something. And it creates motion, and it creates movement. It creates momentum, and momentum. I mean, as Joe Rogan would say, like, momentum is like everything. With anything that you want to do, it's like creating momentum is everything.
It really is. I mean, and when you see it compound, when you see it actually work on top of itself, then you start to see what's possible. And in the initial stages of setting the trajectory of your life, let's just say the acorn becoming the oak tree, right? You're the acorn. You feel like you're nothing. You're underground. No one can see you and nobody cares. And nobody stands around and goes, wow, like you're walked on, and you're this little acorn underground, and people are stepping on you and they don't care about you. They don't even know you exist. And you're like, I want to be this giant oak tree that people read books under and bask in the glory of it and climb and, and you want to be the most massive of all oak trees, that was ever created, right? Or whatever this thing is.
Just as a quick thing, I love that you just said bask in the glory.
Yeah. So, there's this humble beginnings with everything, and these things that you're doing underground, like making your bed and washing the dishes. Maybe your justification, I'm guilty of this. I used to say, oh, I live alone. No one's going to notice. I used to say this. I don't say this anymore. I come home and I look around my place, and there's still some things that I'm like, but this is part of the job. Like, at first, what's acceptable to you is actually a lower standard. And then as you raise your bar, then you start to make it better and better and better. Right. But like, I want to come home as though I've been treated to like a hotel. So like if someone comes to my place, for example, and they go and step into my washroom, I want them to feel like they're in a hotel washroom. I want the cloths to be mint white. I want I want everything to be like pristine and clean and perfect. I want you to walk in there and be like, wow, like this is nice. You know what I mean? And what I'd like to do is, for me, the washroom's the most dirty place for me because I'm a hairy guy. And just like, and I get it. I go hiking and I do stuff in the mud. So it's very easy for me to just go have a shower and wipe off the dirt and, and be like, whatever, I'll deal with it later. But the fact that I can take care of that space allows me to have a certain quality with everything else that's a lot easier. So you pick your troubled area and you make that excellent, right? Because at the end of the day, if you want to be awesome, like whatever your vision is, you don't get to avoid your weakness. So whatever your weakness is, go towards that thing, get control over that. And then all of a sudden you're going to feel like I can do anything, So it's so funny. We're doing this. I want to read a little quote, actually, if you don't mind.
Not at all. I love quotes.
This one's short, I should say. Short quote, powerful quote, important one. I believe the philosopher, the speaker, was a very old Greek man. I think his name's Cicero. I think that's it.
Cicero.
Cicero. That's it. Of course, I always say his name wrong. Cicero. Anyway, he has this quote. It's this good one. He says, if you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need. And I really love that idea because like the garden, you have a garden because a garden is a representation of you. Your garden is you. So the way you tend your garden is the way you tend yourself. And I don't think you necessarily need to literally have a garden to do this, but it doesn't hurt. But I do think that if you look at yourself like a garden, and you look at yourself like the gardener, and then the library is like, there's all this knowledge and wisdom. I mean, podcasts today are kind of like a library. So if you're listening to a podcast, I think in some ways you're doing yourself a similar service.
Yeah, but this is part of this podcast is part of creating your atmosphere.
Yeah. And you get to choose what podcasts you listen to, and some are for entertainment and fun, and that might be good for certain things. And some are more philosophical like this, and some are more about current events. And not that any podcast is not better or worse than the other, but you get to decide what type of information you want to consume and what type of conversation or talk you want to be a part of. And so I'm not saying that this is better or worse than anything else. I'm just saying that if you're choosing this, make sure you're choosing this and looking at it as something like, hey, like, is this nurturing me? Because if this isn't nurturing you, then you should listen to a different podcast. And I'll say that because, like, I truly, genuinely care about our listeners. If this is nurturing you and this is helping you, then you can kind of look at yourself, give yourself a pat on the back and say, hey, I'm putting a little effort into like making myself, look at my life a little bit differently or try some stuff. And that's good. And this can be one little element in the many elements that you bring to your garden.
Yeah. And the more elements you can bring in and discover, because really it's a form of discovery. Again, attention and discovery. It's like, oh, this this activity, this engagement, is in an enriching thing. It's building more of the atmosphere that I want. I wanted to touch on that quote because I was like, because to me that quote's what it says is talking about sustenance in a way. It's talking about nourishment, like like we've been saying. One of them is like the garden, that's nourishment for your body, and the library is the nourishment for your mind. You have everything you need with those things. And I think that I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't entirely mean that literally, even though I'm sure literally it works as well. But if we open it up to a more creative kind of metaphorical level, like there's a lot that we can take from that. It's like really is like how are we nourishing our bodies and our minds? What are we doing? Are we being conscious about those things? These are, and again, like just from, the garden, that's a very simple thing, to something a little bit more ephemeral, like the library, like the knowledge, the body, like these things come together to create like a platform for you to emerge from, and to be whatever the hell it is you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. And it's also like a discovery. Like, you don't know, like, I think that inside each of us, right? Like, I love that quote and I forget where it comes from. Maybe you remember, but the whole idea that inside the acorn is the image of the oak tree kind of concept, right?
Yeah. I believe I think it's been around for a long time, but yeah. The place I really remember getting hammered over the head with it was an author and psychotherapist named James Hillman. He's a brilliant psychotherapist from not too long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I think that the concept is, however you say it or however you put it, it all kind of comes back down to the same thing. Does the acorn know that it's supposed to be an oak tree? Or does it think it might be something else, right? And so, like, if we're all essentially the acorn or something like that, right? We might not know what we're meant to grow into. We don't know what fruit we're supposed to bear, and we don't necessarily know the purpose or the greater contribution that we're supposed to make. And all you really have to rely on is this like sense inside of you and this vision that's almost created out of nothing, and it doesn't exist yet. And so people might say, well, I could never see you doing that. Like, I could never, like, I led a team of 123 people, at one point. When I was a kid, when I was in high school, I was bullied and, I barely was passing. Like, this might sound like little things, but like I was like super shy and just like a loner. And then I went out and did this thing, like these things that happen that we're able to do. Like, I'm talking on a podcast right now, where it's like, we'll get hundreds, thousands of listens. You know what I mean? Like, so for me to get to here to do this, people would have never seen that in me as a kid because I didn't exemplify any of the qualities that make somebody like do these types of things. But like, you have to see it inside of you, and you might not even know what it is yet, and you might not know how far it can go, and you also don't know what you're growing into. And I'm not saying that I know yet, but what I have found in my life is that if I start to really trust this vision, and I start to like honor it and try to behave in a way that would honor it, it begins to become true. And it's a discovery as much as it is a realization of what I want. There's new things that are getting found in it, but you have to trust that you're meant to grow into something. Yeah. And, you know, maybe you're meant to be the oak tree, and maybe that's what you think you're supposed to be, but maybe you're supposed to be something else, and you have to find out. And the only way you're going to find out is by setting the atmosphere to make that possible.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the reasons why I always love using the word nature when it comes and discovering our nature, our true nature, and why lots of other people have, is because I think very often as human beings, we don't necessarily think of ourselves as being beings of nature. We kind of see ourselves as being separate from it, you know, like, or being apart from it. It's like, but we are a part of nature, and we have a nature to us. And when we can look at it that way, then we might begin to listen a little bit more closely to what that thing is, you know, paying a little more closer attention to what that thing is, because we have all kinds of people around us, and whatever our background, upbringing, wherever we were born, you know, there's all of these other pressures telling you, it's like, oh yeah, like you're saying, it's like, no, you're a birch tree, you know, no, you're a pine tree, you're this, you're that, da, 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 da. And next thing you know, you've just got this whole jumble. You don't even know what the hell you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And you are that, you know, you're that oak tree. Right. And I mean, this is a whole sort of philosophical curveball. You know, you could argue that all of those pressures are part of the environment that's necessary for you to discover what that nature in you actually is. You know, like, we can choose to look at it as these are all things that were obstacles and things that are preventing us from being in our nature, or they are precisely the conditions that we need in order for us to discover our nature. Mm-hmm. Because there is tremendous power and freedom through that process. You know what I mean? Through that process of having to engage and pay attention and discover what that thing is, and to say, in the face of everything, no, this is what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. This is the path that I am taking. There's tremendous power in that, and we would only discover that power in some ways, and we would only know it if there was like some kind of resistance to it. Mm-hmm. You know, unless we had to find our way to it. So maybe that's part of the process. Maybe, you know, there's a way that we can welcome the paths that seem like they were a waste of time, the people who betrayed us, the things that didn't go the way that we wanted them to go. You know, perhaps these are the conditions, you know, that are leading us closer and closer and closer and closer to ourselves. Mm-hmm. If we have the courage to actually look at it, and admit what it is.
There's so much good stuff here. You know, it's I want to say one thing is that if you already knew what you were meant to be, life would be kind of boring, because you'd already know the end of the story. You know, you don't go to movies like necessarily wanting to know the ending. I mean, some people do, but like I don't really think that's why. Like, I'll give you an example. We don't really want to know. We want to know the end of the story, but we actually want the journey more. But the end of the story is very important to us. But not knowing what it is often what keeps us engaged. I was telling a story. This was years ago, and it was a horror story or something I heard when I was a kid, but it was a pretty good one. And I was telling it, and I had a bunch of friends around me, a bunch of my peers, and we're sitting at a beach, and it was kind of, I don't know, it was kind of dark and stormy or whatever. And we were just all out hanging out. And I started telling this horror story. And then as I got like halfway through or 3/4 through or something like that, I just totally blanked on what the ending was. I couldn't remember for the life of me. And so I was like, oh man, I don't remember. And all my friends, they were like, what? They could not accept that I didn't know the ending, right? Like they were like, just make it up. But they wanted me to just make up an ending so they could feel completion on the story, which is just goes to the point that people like we all want to believe that the ending is already there, written in stone. But like, if you got to the point in the story where it's like, well, we don't know where the rest of the story goes, people do, well, let's finish it. Let's finish it anyway. We need to complete this thing. You know what I mean? So like when you get invested enough into something, and AKA this is a metaphor for yourself, you're going to want to know where you end up. But if you don't invest anything into yourself, you're not going to care about the story of your life. You're going to let it slip you by. So when you start to like actually see progress in your life story and you get invested in yourself and you get invested in this thing you're doing, you're going to want to follow through. You're going to want to see where it goes, because there's that famous saying, I didn't come this far, it only come this far, you know? And it's true. Once you get a certain amount in, it's like, okay, there's no going back anymore. Let's see where this goes. And I can tell you this, like when I went through my darkest, hardest times, that was definitely a quote that rang through me a few times. It was like, well, I didn't come this far, it only come this far. So let's just hang in there. There were days, I tell you, man, there were days where I was like, I don't know if I'm getting out of this. Like, this might be it. This might be where the story ends. And I sure hope not. But I'm like, just hang in there, just hang in there, just hang in there. And there was days, weeks, months, it felt like forever, where this just looming darkness, pointlessness, a lack of control just seemed to exist. And then I'd be out of it and I feel like I'd fall right back in. And I can tell you that, like, at least for me, the having had invested that much into my dream at that point, even though it was seeing like it was dramatically failing, I was like, but I didn't come all the way here to only get here. So let's see where this goes. And I think, like, you know, part of the initial step is like, people will go like, well, what's the point of making my bed? What's the point of doing this thing? What's the point of trying this thing? Because once you get invested enough, then you'll have the wherewithal to go through what's the point. But right now you can say what's the point because you're not invested enough yet. And that's my personal opinion, but I really think it's true. You got to get invested in yourself, and you got to get invested in the garden of you. And then once you start seeing that stuff grow, you're not going to want to let it get taken and destroyed. Mm-hmm. You're going to want to hold it, try and help it, keep it alive. Yeah. If you put care and love into it.
And also you become a little bit less tolerant of the things that aren't enriching you.
Totally.
Finally, like, it's like you just don't have the time or the energy to put up with shit that you used to put up with.
Yeah.
You know, or activities you used to engage with, you know, like oftentimes are little addictions. You know, that's a very interesting thing when you start to commit to yourself and commit to doing the things that actually enrich you, is that all of these little bad habits, all of these little distractions that, you know, you used to be slave to, suddenly just kind of falling off of you.
Yeah.
You know, maybe like not necessarily they completely disappear, but like they just become less potent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they lose their power. I mean, I think a lot of destructive vices and habits come from a lack of care about yourself and about what's possible for you. Jim Rohn has this thing where he talks about, Jim Rohn's a very famous speaker, but he talks about like getting up early, and he talks about, well, people say, why are you getting up early? And you can always just say to them, if you were going where I was going and you were going to meet who I was going to meet, you'd get up early too. And I really like that idea. Like once you start believing that what you want is possible, because a lot of the times I find people who have destructive vices have a very low belief in what's possible for them. They a lot of the time, because if they knew what they were giving up, they wouldn't do that stuff. Yeah. But when you do that stuff because maybe secretly to yourself, you're not believing in it. And here's the thing. You might justify that it's never going to happen for you. Look, I've done all the tricks. I said, well, it can happen for other people, but not me. I mean, we have all the tricks.
Yeah.
So I participated in self-destructive behavior, you know, and I look back now and I'm almost embarrassed at some of it, but like, that was where I was at. And what I had to learn was to value my future again and have faith in it. You know, because when you have no faith in your future and who you can become and what's possible, you're going to be willing to be self-destructive in the moment.
Yeah. And that reminds me a lot of what Gabor Mate, who, like, to the listeners out there, if you've never checked out stuff by Gabor Mate, this he's an amazing psychiatrist who's done a lot of work on addiction. You know, and basically everyone has an addiction, and the addiction is there because it replaces something that we didn't get, essentially, especially really bad addiction. And it's there as a replacement, usually to some kind of like the love that we never, and support that we didn't have. And it makes us, it fills that hole of that thing that we don't have. But essentially, what, I don't know exactly, there was somewhere I wanted to take that, but
Classic Evan. I love it.
I get sidetracked in one thing, and then it's just like, and then the other thing is gone.
Well, you know, we have these addictions there, or these self-destructive behaviors. You know, sometimes when it's like, you can be addicted to a good thing, but when you're addicted to a good thing, you're usually not like, you can be addicted to a good thing and have it be filling a gap inside of you. Like for me, like, I know this is true for me. Like when I was younger, I really believed that like being liked and being popular was going to get me like happiness, and it was going to make me feel like loved. So there's a lot of behaviors that I did and a lot of actions I took just to try to, be included and to make friends, because, and it probably goes back even to childhood, but like I remember in high school, like I remember just not being included, not being a part of things, and not being like, and there was this part of me as I got older and I found, like I have more skills, so I can figure out ways to actually be a part of cool groups and, whatever. But some of that, or at least a good portion of that behavior, was coming from, just things that I was doing were just coming from like me just not feeling like I was enough and feeling like I was good enough and I wanted to be liked and be included. And I think that, addiction is a big topic. I mean, here's the thing. If you're a plant in this metaphor and something is destroying the plant, right? If you're like tending a plant and every time you did something, it like made the plant wilt, and you actually saw it wilting, if it had grown into something more, you would probably care. But if it hasn't grown yet, you might not care because you don't see the wilting, right? The more it grows, the more you see the wilting, the more you're going to stop the behavior. So a lot of addiction, I believe, comes from the fact that we don't see the effect of the addiction, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like any addiction, as far as I understand it, like an addiction is any sort of like basically habit that has a negative consequence on yours and others' lives, right? Whatever that is. And the truth is that most of us have addictions. It's just that some of us don't. Our addictions aren't as overt or as crippling as say like a drug addict or something, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But like the thing that I'd actually initially set out to say, this is what Brandon always does. It's like I forget. He like brings it around. He brings in another good point, and then by the time he's done, it's just like, oh, it's hit me again. But basically, the addiction, our addictions. What he did, because he worked with a lot of like really bad drug addiction for a lot of years. And the first thing that he said to all of the people that came in to see him was, like, hey, let's thank the heroin Let's thank the whatever the meth. Let's thank the whatever the thing is, the drug was. Like, let's thank it because it kept you alive. Like, in a weird way, that thing kept you alive for the time that it was there. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's obviously now become destructive. But in some ways, our addictions, our distractions, they're all kind of the same thing. There's something that we are getting out of it that is helping us to keep going, because life is not for the faint of heart. No. It is a challenging thing, but if I learned anything from Marcus Aurelius, it's what we're made for. We're made for this hard stuff of life that confronts us. And we're made for it in a way that we become better, we become wiser, we become stronger. And there comes a time when we need to eventually admit and face up to our distractions and our addictions, and get really honest with ourselves about what those things are. And this might seem like we've kind of gone on a bit of a side amble here, but this is all related to this whole thing where we began with create your atmosphere to flourish.
Yeah.
Creating that atmosphere is about these honest looks at the things that we do that, maybe it's not having a negative impact on anybody else, but maybe deep down in you, and you're making excuses for it. I know I have like little habits and things that I was just like, God, this is not, this, it's not really harming anyone else, but this is not doing good things for me. This is not putting my mind, my energies, the person I want to be is not contained within this thing that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. It's like, so then you've got to ask what the hell why you're even doing that. What's the purpose of this anymore? And to begin to make other choices, to begin to get into that state of reflection. It's like, well, what are, again, the things that enrich me? Oh, you know what? Just like laying down, like listening to like a great album or great music, or, going out and seeing live performance, or again, like going out into nature, reading whatever kind of books do something to you, like really, like that's kind of the stuff that you're looking for. And this is always what I teach actors when I'm trying to teach actors, how to put themselves into like really intense emotional states. It's just like, well, like you're looking for the stuff that's going to do something to you. It's not about you doing it so much as you're looking for the things that do something to you. And that's kind of how you begin to create that atmosphere around you, is beginning to recognize, what are these powerful forces in your life that do something to you in a way that's enriching.
I think that comes down to perspective too. Like, I think you need to have your radar open to what is being done to you, and that comes from both positive and negative. Like, if there's negative things, and like, for example, something that I learned when I was younger was, if you hang around with somebody and you feel worse, take a note of that. If you feel better, take a note of that. If you feel neutral, like just take a note, so that you start to know, like, okay, well, I did this thing, and I feel this way, and that, not that that's the end all be all judge and determiner whether this thing's good for you, but like, take notes, start taking notes on your life, start seeing what's working for you, what's helping you, what's enriching you.
Yeah.
Like, I basically shut off my Facebook feed. It was like, it was not good for me. I just don't know what to say. Like, it was just not good for me. And it was so hard to admit, because I'm like, nah, it's not doing anything to me. I'm fine. And like, here's the thing, like, we use it. It's part of the social media platform. It's a great way to stay connected. I just decided that I wouldn't terminate my Facebook use, but I decided that I would change how I used Facebook. And I did this to nurture myself. And it dramatically helped. And I can tell you what I did was I turned off all notifications. I don't want any. My phone never beeps for a Facebook notification, ever. I turned everything off. And the only way I will look at Facebook, at the actual pages and stuff, is if I decide to click on the app to go into it. But I'll never get notified. And you know what's, I look at my notifications, because if I ever go back in and I look at it, I'm like, 90% of these notifications I do not care about and I do not want to know. And I'm just like, I'm just like, delete them all, and then I'll look at like 1 out of maybe 10. Yeah. And so I think about how I used to live, and I used to get 10 notifications like per say day or per several hours or whatever, probably more because I used it more. And 90% of that was probably crap. So if you're doing an activity and 90% of it is like not good and not useful for you and not enriching your life, I mean, that's so much energy and time. And then the other thing is I would walk away taking in these images of like, someone would be like, this horrible thing happened to these people and this animal and this thing and this company did that. And it's like, I am aware that all this stuff's going on. Like I get that, but me being reminded of that every single day and I'm not doing anything about it is not healthy. If I want to know about something and I'm actually going to do something about it, that's different. Like if you're an activist and you're actually being an activist, it's probably good for you to figure out what's going on so you can figure out how to be a better activist. Mm-hmm. But most of us are not. And what I found though, when I turned off Facebook, I still found out about all the key information. I didn't need Facebook. I found out about it anyway. Maybe I didn't find out about that minute that it happened, because that's what Facebook does. But I found out about it through socializing, connecting, and through that it opened up conversations with people, which are actually what Facebook's supposed to be about, to actually connect, right? So for example, I'm not trying to slam Facebook. I'm just saying like Facebook is good in many ways and it's bad in the ways that we use it. And if you don't and there's people who are trying to use it to like manipulate you. So if you let them, that's your own fault, right? It doesn't mean Facebook's bad. But there's lots of people, and I'm not talking about people who run Facebook. I'm talking about marketers and people on the other end. Maybe they're even your friends or your contacts, and they're using Facebook as a platform to get something that isn't good. And so then you're on the other end, and you're the one that's getting that. So you need to be very mindful of how you check that app, how you relate to that feed. And this is just one of so many examples, thousands, millions of examples, and you need to check, when I do this thing, am I actually feeling better? Is this actually good for me? And if you're in a constant state of like depression or you're feeling down, I would say like there's some big warning flags with social media. Turn off all your social media. See how you feel. It's probably going to be super hard for you because you don't want to admit you're addicted to it. Yeah. But there you go.
No, it's and that's just it's one of those amazing ways of just, again, going by the feeling of like what is your experience of it when you're all finished? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel like taking action on something? Does it, are you enriched?
Depleted?
Yeah, like that's your gauge, and that's just one simple way. I was gonna say it's funny because I use the Duolingo app. I'm learning French and Spanish on this app, and like during the loading screens, it says like something like spending like 5 minutes a day on Duolingo can teach you a language. What does 5 minutes on social media do for you? Right? And I was like, oh, that's like good point.
Yeah. I mean, you ultimately are where you put your energy. You are whatever you put your energy into. Mm-hmm. So,
your attention and your energy.
You become it, right? So you have to be I think that the most valuable thing in the world is attention. I think people don't realize it. I think that, time is very valuable, but I think attention is even more valuable because what you're putting your attention on will create your reality, and your internal reality is your external atmosphere, which is kind of the point that we wanted to get to in this conversation. Like if you don't like the external elements of your life, there's elements that are internal that need work. And through working internally, you'll work externally, and then you have to work externally to work the internally, and you have to go back and forth. And it's not like just one or the other, because people want this like quick fix. They're like, oh, if I just work on myself, then I'll fix my life. It's like, no, you got to work on yourself, and then you got to work on your life and your friendships and your relationships. And then you got to work on yourself again. And then you got to go work on your business. And then you got to go work on yourself again. And it's like back and forth. And it's like you're going like up a wall, you know, like, and you're kind of, or two walls. You got to hop to one side, hop to the other, hop to the other, hop to the other. Like it's not a one side fits all. We have to do internal and external work at the same time. And I just have to say this because I just got to get this out. And it's something that really bothers me, because we talk a little woo woo here and there. I really do not like people. And listen, if you're out there and you're doing woo woo stuff and you're telling people to just do internal work, and you're not telling them to take any action, and you're not like reminding them that they have to like do some things in the physical world to make physical, practical things happen, that they can just wish upon a star and like law of attraction shit, and that's it, you're misleading them. And that's not good. That's not healthy. Mm-hmm. Like you can have, and I honestly fully believe that you should really build a strong internal world of like, be clear on what you want, be clear on your vision, be clear on the things you want to attract to your life. All of that is very valuable and important, but it's only half the picture. You still have to act on it when opportunities arise. You have to build your relationships with people if you want to move forward in the world, like as a collective. Like you don't just get to wish upon a star and hope that it's going to happen. Like we're all playing in a world internally and externally, and you got to find a balance. And maybe it's more internally than it is externally. Like I'll give you that, maybe. And some people believe it's more externally than internally, but like it's a little of both. I guarantee that, because you got to take a little action. You can't just be totally woo woo and wishy and hopeful. Like it takes action too. Yeah. But it's not all action, because if it's all action and no like internal growth and no internal vision, like what's the action for?
Yeah. It's like, what are you pointing the spear towards, you know, kind of thing. Yeah, totally. Like with any sort of, thing that I have participated in on sort of, I guess, that woo-woo spectrum of things, but like through, you know, meditation retreats and things like that, there's always integration. There's always a talk about integration at the end of it. It's like, yes, you've had this experience here in this time and in this moment. It's like, but how are you going to what are you going to do to integrate this into your life in a deeper way, so that it actually, you know, takes root, to go with our sort of analogy that we've been going, and so that it takes root, so that it can grow, because otherwise it, you know, you haven't planted it.
Right. Because in the bubble of spirituality, everything is perfect. And you go on a retreat, everything's perfect. And you can learn these great things and these great wisdoms and these great lessons. And you can be great. I'm going to go into the world and I'm just going to like live like this now. And no, you won't, because what's going to happen is the cake's going to get put in front of you. The beer is going to get put in front of you. The smokes, the TV, all the things that you know that are taking you away from your spiritual connectedness. And then you're going to have to deal with that. And, you know, it comes down to it comes down to that side of the plant that can take the weather. You know what I mean? Like we live in a plant has to survive the weather. Think about it that way. You think about a big standing oak tree or something like that. Mm-hmm. It takes the snow, it takes the rain, it takes the sun, it takes all of it. And it stands strong. And like, if you want to grow into your vision, you have to take the weather. And part of taking the weather is the real world action. It doesn't just get to be a seed underground and still be the oak tree. So in the spiritual bubble, you're the seed underground, and you get to like work on the seed and on all of that. And what does the seed want to do? But like, you got to step out into the world, and you got to learn how to take the punches. You know, you got to learn how to take the hits, and you got to have that strong vision so that, you know, you don't get uprooted by someone else because, you know, like the weather pushes you over, the wind's too strong for you, you know, like you still got to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think that this is my motto for like coaching and mentoring, is that I think that people should be taught and inspired both internally from a idealistic, passionate, kind of hopeful, optimistic, visionary type of way. But I think that a good coach and a mentor prepares you for the weather. They prepare you for the hard knocks, and they give you the toughness that you need to take that vision and all that spiritual woo-woo lovely stuff and make it strong in the world. Because if you're the most spiritual person and you can't stand the weathering of the world and the harshness of people while you believe in what you believe in, then you can't, your spirituality means nothing. And there's going to be people that are going to tear down your beliefs. Yeah. So anyway, that's
means, it was like when you're talking about that, like the thing that came to my mind is just like swearing at people in traffic. It all means nothing when you're calling that person in traffic an asshole, Like
yeah, I know. Yeah, totally.
Well, we're having a drink. We're having a drink.
Let's mention it. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had this one recently, but it's just, trying to avoid as much going out into public spaces, especially indoor, as possible still in these strange times. So I'm just drinking another Steamworks Pilsner, which I think I had maybe a month back or something like that. It's great, man. Got no qualms with it whatsoever.
I'm drinking a Kolsch, and this is from Off the Rail Brewing Company. And they got a little German flag for a can.
Oh, yeah. I think I've had that one before.
It's good. It's nice and light and tasty. So that's that's the brew that's on the table for me. Okay, here. Before we wrap this thing up, I want to talk about, I just want to kind of bring the conversation to the idea of like how to nurture yourself. We did talk a little bit about it, but I want to go more into that because I think we talked about some of the philosophy of it, and we talked about, I kind of went off on a rant about like, you got to weather the storm, but I think that like, as much as I believe in all of that, and I think that's true, how do you actually make yourself grow? Like, what do you do? And we kind of talked about like going towards what feels good, in nurturing and fulfilling, and staying away from what seems toxic and bad and destructive to you. And you have to make those decisions. But how could we like flesh that out a little bit more and kind of, bring in a little bit more of maybe that area of the conversation?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, I think we've already covered the sense of like doing the things that are enriching, like these things that are creatively, getting things moving and stirring within you in what feels like a positive direction. And again, these aren't things that are, oh, I should be doing this, or I should this, or should that. These require a certain level of, again, attention into understanding that these are things that are enriching for you, not things that are enriching for somebody else. You can borrow if something works and you're like, oh yeah, that's great. I love that. Try different things out, have fun, play with a lot of these different things. But, like to go with like what you're saying, sort of like, these trees, they weather these different storms, they weather different seasons of the year, but it moves with them. I think, if to continue with this metaphor, to continue with this analogy, the trees move with the seasons. They don't try to change the season that's happening. They move with it. When things get cold, they shed their leaves, and they go into a state of kind of resting and of sleeping. And then there's a time for them to come back out and to flourish and to reach out to the sun and to grow and to do all of these things. Like it and with the snow and the rain, it takes that time to absorb all of those things, these nutrients. So it's like we're not so dissimilar. Sometimes we do have to weather storms. There's a situation that happens, a circumstance, a change that is we're suddenly find ourselves thrust into. There is material there. There are nutrients that are within that situation and within that season that is occurring. And if we can recognize it, which is, again, it's one of our laws, is the seasons, law of seasons and cycles, is that, there's a time to harvest and there's a time to seed. There's a time for all of these different things. you don't have to be upset on top of difficult times. It's like, okay, this is just the time that's happening right now. This is what is being presented. And if we can have that level of awareness and perspective in the midst of it happening, we can ride it out with a lot more sort of gracefulness and come out with it with, because like a lot of times it's those storms and those winds that create strength in these trees. There's these beautiful trees that grow on in the Gulf Islands in British Columbia. They grow in other places too, but these arbutus trees, they're my absolute favorite. They've got these rich red bark and they kind of grow close to the ocean. They are like these just dense, hard trees that grow quite thick, but they'll just reach right out across the water. Like, and you don't even understand how this tree is standing and how it's not toppling over, but it's this thing that it knows the tree that it is, and it's the environment has taught it to be that way, to have that kind of strength where it can shoot itself right over across the water and then deal with storms and with massive winds, and they retain their integrity throughout.
That's awesome. And you brought in so many good things in that conversation. That part of the conversation.
I jumped around a little bit, but we got there.
There's so much good in there. I won't even comment on it at this point because that's just something I just want to hear again. But you're right. I mean, the whatever you are, I mean, you will adapt to your environment. And, I think that it's important to not try to be anything other than what you are and not try to be in any other season that you're in. Sometimes you're in a stage of growth and rebuilding. Sometimes you're in a stage of just weathering a storm and you're just, you're hanging in there. And that's part of the life journey. It doesn't all get to be flourish and growth and all this, and that's part of what I think makes the whole journey of this all so interesting. And it doesn't mean because you have to weather it that you shouldn't grow into something, that you should stay hidden in the ground your whole life, hiding away from the outside world. I would say that a mistake that people often make, and I've made myself, is that we wait to be who we truly are. We wait until circumstances to be who we truly are. So what I mean is, like, people will say, well, I don't have enough money or I don't have enough time. And the thing is that if something's important enough, you'll make the time. And if something's important enough, you'll find the money. And you can always kind of test yourself against that. So when you're, the thing is you partly what's going to nurture you is you deciding to not tell those stories anymore and deciding that you're going to be who you would be if you had the money and if you had the time. So you got to make it, you have to figure out what you need to do. So for example, you don't have the time. You got to look at well, where do I have time? Don't look at the time you don't have, look at the time you do have. And in that time, you got to take something out of that. So you might say does everybody have 5 minutes? Does every person in the world have 5 minutes that they can figure out how to corner out somewhere in the world and just get? Well, that 5 minutes could be the time that you're reading your book or the time that you're doing this thing. And you think you're going to justify it and say, well, 5 minutes doesn't matter. And I can tell you 5 minutes means the world. It's like money, right? People go, I'm broke, I don't have money, I don't have money. Okay, do you save 1%? Are they I spend every dollar? It's okay, then what you're going to do is you're going to save 1% of everything you make. Really, you should be saving probably 20 to 50% of what you make, or at least 20 to 30%. And people hear that and they go, that's crazy. But it's when you start saving 1%, you're going to start learning how to save 2. And when you can save 2, you might be able to save 4. And if you can save 4, then maybe 8. And the thing is what ends up happening is you build the ability to do something that was impossible before. And it creates a compound amount of power. So for example, if you can carve 5 minutes out of your day, pretty soon you're going to be able to carve out 10. And if you do that long enough, you're going to be able to carve out 20, right? And then like, how long is it going to take before you can carve out your whole day? Like, that's the power of compound interest, right? That's the power of compounding a good habit and a good thing for you. So when we're talking about nurturing, like, you got to find that 5 minutes of time. You got to find that 1% of your earnings to save. You got to find that, and you got to do that for yourself. And that is where the real work occurs. That's the hard work, but that's where you're going to build those roots in the ground that are going to make you stand forever. And if you are going to make an excuse why you can't find 5 minutes or you can't find 1 minute, that's on you. That's just on you, you know?
Yeah.
So, and you can make all the excuses in the world. And I just, like, I'm on a rant. I am. You can make all the excuses in the world. You're like, my job doesn't allow it. My family doesn't allow it. Well, get them on board. Get them on board. Figure it out. You know, do you have a break at work? If you have a break, you have 5 minutes, I guarantee you. So you work on your break. Don't talk to your colleagues. Don't sit by the water cooler. Don't do all that bullshit that you've been doing. Go put some work in on your break. You know, as far as I know, at least in North America, you get 2 breaks and 1 lunch. That's 1 hour. So you have 1 hour of time between work. You say, well, I got to eat and read, eat and do the thing you need to do. Whatever you got to do, you know, so many people are going on their break and they're smoking. And then they say, I don't have the time. You know, it's like, you have the time to smoke. You have the time to kill yourself. Why don't you have the time to build yourself? You know what I'm saying? So I went on a little rant, but these are the things that people, I really believe, need to hear. They're the things I needed to hear when I was a kid, because this is the hard, tough love side of things that I think is so, so important for people. And they don't like you when you say it, but they love you when they see what it does for them. Yeah. So it's a true act of love to try to tell somebody the thing that's going to help them change their life. And I apologize, and I don't apologize. I apologize that I have to be the jerk right now to say this, and it might be harsh, but I'm also not apologizing, because I know that if you do these things for yourself, great things will begin to happen, and it will just be just the beginning of what's possible. You begin to sprout as that plant. So, you know, maybe that's not the answer everybody wants to hear when they say, like, hey, let's talk about how to build yourself. But like, that's honestly where I think it starts. I think it starts in those places, those hidden corners you're not looking at. And,
you know, I really kind of love that you brought up this thing of like time, like 5 minutes. Most of us can find 5 minutes.
Everybody
somewhere.
can find 5 minutes.
Everyone can find 5 minutes, you know?
Yeah.
And to just build up, you know, this on that point you were making, you know, it's like maybe 5 minutes seems like nothing, but from an artist perspective, 5 minutes has made artists' entire careers. That audition, that music set, that one piece that, there was a lot that would build up to it, but that 5 minutes changed their whole lives. And maybe this is the way we need to start looking at these 5 minutes that we put aside for ourselves. Like, you know, like again, and going back in our conversation, maybe no one else sees it, but if you do, because maybe that 5 minutes you spent to sit and read that book, or that you spent, you know, just sitting and doing some meditating, or taking that, you know, a little breath of fresh air. Maybe something happens in that moment that brings you clarity about something, that you suddenly discover some kind of direction, an opportunity, a possibility that wasn't there before, that you wouldn't have discovered had you not taken that 5 fucking minutes.
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes can change your life.
And and do it. It can. It absolutely can. And, you know, 1% of saving your money, as broke as you might feel, just put 1% aside. Because when you're dead broke, you're like, just every dollar just seems like it's going towards a debt or a bill or something like that. you take that 1% and you feel like I could use this 1% for this bill, but the accumulation of that 1%, seeing that grow and being able to put that aside. And yeah, maybe you have to deal with some consequences. Maybe you have to give something up you like, or maybe you have to like eat something you don't want to eat, like, and I don't mean that just literally, maybe you got to like metaphorically like eat a little shit, so to speak. And it's like that 1% though is going to build. And pretty soon when you start seeing that you created more opportunity because you have a little bit of money, then you're going to start to see that like, hey, like if I just put 2% aside, maybe I could do a little more, because I could do that in half the time. And like the power of 5 minutes and the power of 1% is just so big. And people like, it's like the penny, right? Like people overlook it. And it's like, put it aside, build it, do something with it. And all of a sudden, like one day you're like, wake up and you go, hey, I got something here. The stuff is added up. And I think that's also important, when you're nurturing a plant. Like if gardening is a great little example, because when you're first nurturing seeds, for the first little bit, nothing happens. And this is the thing. I think people get frustrated because they put 5 minutes into something, or, they go to the gym like a few times and they go like, I'm not going to, it's too hard, whatever. It's like, you got to keep doing it, and if you keep doing it, you keep watering it, you keep giving it the sun, you keep giving it the thing it needs, the thing you need, eventually you start to sprout. You're going to start to see something surface. And that's like exciting. And then you're like, oh man, this thing isn't growing fast enough. It's like, that's the next stage, but it will grow, and like, sometimes you got to like put a lot of effort into something for a very long time before you even see it sprout, like bamboo is like that, right? Like bamboo takes years, like before it like really grows. And the thing is like, or it takes a very long time. I don't know how long exactly.
There's some variety. There's like the one variety of bamboo that like, it doesn't do anything for like 8 or 10 years or something like that. And then it just goes boom.
Right. There you go. Yeah, exactly. So it's like that idea, right? So, maybe you're working at something and you feel like you're getting nowhere. Like that's where faith comes in. That's where your sense of belief in yourself comes in. That's where you got to trust your vision. Like this thing inside of you that you're meant to be, it doesn't necessarily come out right away. It's going to need a lot of care and a lot of nurturing before it's going to be ready to surface. And like, that might be you, and you just have to stay with it, and you have to decide that you're worth it. I think that's really like at the end of the day, like the atmosphere that you create is a product of how much you care.
Nice.
Right? Because that's what this conversation is about. The atmosphere is a representation of your care, both externally and internally. The atmosphere is your level of care about yourself and your world. So you decide, like when I was talking about my pristine bathroom, that's one element where I'm putting a lot of care. Now that can extend to my bedroom, my living room, my kitchen, my everything, my car, like everything, my workspace. I've been pushing this and going like, where else could I care? Where else could I put care and consideration into things? And I'm starting to like, not just places, but I'm like, what about friendships? Like maybe I can put more care into that. You know what I mean? And like, as you do this, you start to see your expansiveness. And it all started with the toilet.
You know what? This is,
or a sink.
Wow. This is like what an amazing thing you brought it to, because it really is about care.
Yeah.
And just because you asked the question, it's like, well, what more could, you asked yourself this question of what more can I put care into? And the answer is everything. We can put more care into absolutely everything that we do. And if we begin to just more mindfully put more care into everything that we do, we'll begin to create a beautiful atmosphere for ourselves to flourish.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.